there's a hand on a cave wall in France. It is 30,000 years old. Whoever made it pressed their palm flat against the stone, took a mouthful of red ochre, and blew. The hand appeared in negative, a ghost of a person surrounded by darkness. We don't know their name, we don't know their face, but we know one thing with absolute certainty. They wanted someone to know they had been there. That is not the instinct of an animal. That is the instinct of someone who understood, in some wordless, aching way, that to exist without being witnessed is its own kind of disappearing. Most people, when they think about ancient humans, think about survival, finding food, making fire, avoiding predators. What they don't think about is the silence, the specific kind of silence that falls when you are the only person awake, and the darkness presses in from every direction, and the fire is dying, and there is nothing between you and the night but the sound of your own breathing. That silence has a name now. We call it loneliness, and the way our ancestors survived it, how they fought it, converted it, weaponized it, may be the most important question about what it means to be human, because they did survive it, and the way they did changed everything. 52 million years ago, something happened in the ancestral line that would eventually become us. Our primate ancestors were nocturnal. They moved alone in the dark, quiet and invisible, picking food from trees before anyone could see them do it. Then they shifted to daytime, and suddenly they could be seen. A creature that can be seen can be hunted. A creature that can be hunted needs allies. Research published in Nature traced this exact evolutionary moment, the point where primates stopped being solitary foragers and began, for the first time, to bond. Not because they wanted to, because the alternative was death. The group was not a preference. It was a technology. And like every technology, once it existed, it began to reshape the creature that built it. Here is what loneliness actually is. Not the feeling of wanting company. That's a simplified version of something far more ancient and far more violent. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger ran a study at UCLA. She put people inside brain scanners and made them feel rejected. What she found changed how scientists think about pain. Social rejection activated the exact same neural pathways as physical injury, the same regions, the same signals, the same chemistry. Your brain does not distinguish between being stabbed and being abandoned. To your nervous system, they are the same emergency, which means loneliness was never a mood. It was an alarm. And for 100,000 years, it was the alarm that kept us alive. The biological signal that said, "You have separated from the group. You will not survive alone. Return now." The pain was the point. Anthropologists estimate that ancient hunter-gatherers lived in groups of roughly 20 to 50 people. Not towns, not villages, just a small constellation of human beings moving together across an indifferent landscape. Every person in that group knew every other person by name, by voice, by smell. They knew who snored, who lied, who could be trusted with a fire in a storm. This closeness, this suffocating, impossible to escape intimacy, is so foreign to us now that researchers struggle to describe it without making it sound like like a punishment. But for our ancestors, it was the opposite. It was safety made flesh. And every time that group scattered, every time someone wandered too far or fell behind or was left alone at dusk, the alarm went off. But what happened when returning wasn't possible? What happened when the group moved on without you? When grief arrived, when the winter was long and the fire was small, and there was no one left to speak to? In 2024, a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences examined the deepest chambers of Manat Cave in what is now Israel. In the darkest part of the cave, a place that required fire to reach, that required intention to find, researchers discovered something they weren't expecting. A carved boulder, grooves cut deliberately into stone, traces of wood ash, evidence of fire being used not for warmth, not for cooking, but for light, for gathering. Someone had brought people into the dark on purpose. They had built a place that was separate from the ordinary world, a container for something the ordinary world could not hold. The scientists called it a ritual compound. What they were really describing was something older than language, older than religion, older than civilization. They were describing what human beings do when the pain gets too large to carry alone. They make a fire. They gather in the dark. They say, I am here. You are here. This is enough. Consider what it costs to bury someone. Not emotionally, practically. You have to stop moving. In a world built on movement, on the relentless logic of following food and water and warmth, stopping is dangerous. And yet, at a site called Tinshemet Cave in Israel, dating back 100,000 years, researchers found the deliberate remains of 5 early humans, 2 full skeletons, careful placement, more than 500 fragments of red ochre, a pigment created by heating iron-rich stone, scattered carefully across the burial site. They weren't just deposited, they were arranged. Someone had taken time they could not afford to spend to mark that a person had existed, not to survive death, to survive forgetting. 30,000 years ago, in what is now the Czech Republic, a woman was buried beneath 2 mammoth shoulder blades, leaned against each other like a small dark tent. Around her, traces of red ochre. Near her skull, a flint spearhead. In one hand, the skeleton of a fox. But months before this burial, someone had carved her face in ivory, the left side deliberately disfigured, matching the same asymmetry in her actual skull. They had looked at her hard enough to memorialize her. She was not just someone. She was someone specific, irreplaceable, worth stopping for. Archaeologists believe she may have been a shaman, a person whose entire role was to stand at the border between the living and the dead, between the group and the void, which means that even in its grief, the group had developed a specialist, someone whose job was to hold what could not otherwise be held. That is not primitive. That is architecture, social architecture, a structure built not from wood or stone, but from human attention. When 2 people touch, when a hand is placed on an arm, when a forehead leans against another forehead, the brain releases oxytocin, a neuropeptide so ancient it appears in species as distant from us as nematode worms. In humans, it does something remarkable. It quiets the vigilance systems. It tells the part of the brain scanning constantly for threat that the threat has passed. For a moment, the alarm goes silent. For a creature living in a world full of things that could kill it, that silence was not a small thing. That silence was rest. And the only way to get it was through another person, which means our ancestors were not simply drawn toward each other for warmth or resources. They were drawn toward each other the way a drowning person is drawn toward air. Because isolation, to a nervous system tuned across millions of years of evolution, was not discomfort. It was dying. The oldest cave paintings are not scenes of triumph, not battles, not victories. They are animals rendered with extraordinary precision in the deepest and darkest parts of caves, places that required torchlight to reach, that required someone to guide you, that required trust. Lascaux in France, painted 30,000 years ago, bison, horses, and aurochs running across a curved stone ceiling as though the rock itself were alive. Chauvet, also in France, 40,000 years old, rhinoceroses drawn with shadows that suggest movement, mammoths gathered in herds that seem to breathe. No one lived in these deep caves. They were not practical spaces. Acoustic researchers who mapped these chambers found something the painters clearly already knew. The stone resonates. The caves were, and this is the scientific word, well suited for communal gatherings, for speech, for hearing. The ancients did not go deep into the earth to be alone. They went to be together in a new way, to share something that couldn't survive in daylight, something that required the walls to press close, something that required you to hold your torch up and see the beast painted above you and feel, for a moment, that you were part of something that could not die, because the group could die. Individuals died all the time, but the images on the wall, the hands, the horses, the running herds, those could not be taken. They were the part of the group that survived everything. We live now in a world of unprecedented connection, more communication, more contact, more visibility than any human being in history has ever had. And yet, chronic loneliness has reached levels the World Health Organization has called an epidemic. The alarm is going off everywhere, and we are doing something our ancestors never did. We are treating it as a personal failure, a flaw in the individual, a symptom to be managed in private. But it was never personal. It was always a signal from something far older than personality, the same signal that drove someone into a cave 30,000 years ago to press their hand against stone and breathe red ochre into the dark. The same signal that made a group stop moving to bury one of their own with pigment and fox bones, and a small leaning tent of mammoth bone overhead. The same signal that sent people to the deepest part of the earth to make images of running animals on resonant stone, so that the echo of their voices would fill the chamber. And for one firelit, irreducible moment, none of them would be alone. The ancients did not solve loneliness. No one has ever solved it. What they did was build, again and again, in every medium available to them, cave walls, ochre, bone, fire, ritual, story. A container large enough to hold it. They made meaning out of the pain, the way a shell is made around a grain of sand. Slowly, persistently, together. And the container they built, fragile, impermanent, made of nothing but shared attention, turned out to be the most durable structure in human history. We are still living inside it. Every time you reach for someone in the dark, every time you say, "I was here," and hope that someone will hear, you are doing exactly what they did. The hand on the cave wall is 30,000 years old, and it still has not stopped reaching.